Okay, hey, my name is Anni Joutsenvirta. I'm a courses chair at UXPA International, and I am here today with Jen Romano, our co-chair at the conference, and Chris Becker, who is presenting a course at UXPA International. Sorry. Let's start by talking, how did you end up being in this field? What is your history as a UX person?
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad to be here. My background is I started off as a graphic designer in undergrad. I sort of always liked tinkering with computers to some extent. My dad had a 1984 like 2CI that we sort of played with as kids, and I took a commercial art class when I was in high school, which really was like I like to make stuff to some extent, and that led to a lot of sort of building of stuff. I went to grad school at the Art Center College of Design, where I studied media design, and essentially they were training us to be user researchers and UX before like the UX was a thing, but they didn't really like highlight that. Almost all of my colleagues that sort of came out of there have the skills to be UX designers, which sort of resulted in that. And I remember my very first job, a guy was like, "Hey, I think you'd be a good UX designer." I was like, "Oh, okay." Great. Like, sure. Like, what is, like, I'm sure I understand the sort of rationale of those things. Um, Part of going to grad school was about being connected to the education space. I was sort of wanted to be a teacher or wanted to sort of do that, which resulted in making a lot of stuff, writing about the world of design. I've sort of worked on boot camps and other things like that in the space. I currently teach at Otis College of Design and at the Art Center College of Design. I've written a couple books. That's sort of just what one thing leads to the next, and you sort of want to be helpful in the way that you can. And fascinating because it always allows you to learn something new. There's no mountaintop, there's no
Mm,
guru, there's no like
mm,
I have made it and therefore have to
mhm.
no longer learn anything new. It is a dynamic and
Mm.
constantly changing space, which is sort of a fascinating thing to
Awesome.
continue to learn in. So that's my sort of
Awesome.
space.
So what are the things where you do learning these days? What is happening in your life?
I mean, our industry is going through a significant amount of change as we sort of like, if you slightly pay attention to anyone talking, there's AI will jut out of everyone's mouth in about 2.5 seconds, which is understandable. I uh, teach in the world of design as a way to sort of show people that making is really possible in the world that we knew, but you have to understand the systems at which you make it within. And the systems are always changing because we make systems and they get sort of messy or inefficient or whatever that is. And then we design new tools to make them more efficient or make their outputs. And then we sort of watch um, the larger forces sort of modify, change, or update. And there's sort of things to continue to learn about ways to speed up the power of a designer, right? How do you learn faster? How do you sort of pull together more assets? How can you spend more time with your end users versus just sort of like making notes about your interview that took you 40 minutes, but then you had to spend 4 hours sort of analyzing it? Like AI and those tools can really speed up those things, or at least sort of go at the ethos of like, well, what is the value we really bring to the world? And I think that is that a place of like, it's not just that we tinker around with stuff and make things, that like we can go find insight, we can go solve business problems, we can go sort of align that to the future. And we can prototype things. So that's what I sort of show people all the time of like, yeah, you can prototype at the fastest we've ever been able to ever in history. And so let's make sure that we're actually doing that, and doing that at pace and showing the value that what that translates to. So um, the short of it is a lot of it playing with AI, and
Mm.
that's just the nature of what we have to do to some extent, which is
Yeah.
good.
Okay. How do you balance that, like the power of AI and then the like a traditional design UX craft
Yeah.
in your teaching? Because
I mean, it is a great question, and it's one that we're all grappling with to some extent. I sort of like lament the idea, like, whatever. I was just chatting with a student of like, you guys have it so easy. Like I was just chatting with this student. I just finished a web technologies course at the Arts Center College of Design, and she was pulling together all these assets for. She did a redesign of Blick, which is like a art uh, design template. And I'm like, you probably grabbed all those assets and then just like shoved them into like an AI to remove all the backgrounds, right? She was like, yeah. I'm like, in my day, we would have had to spend hours and hours in Photoshop, sort of like cleaning that thing up, and that was very inefficient. But that was the only way we knew how to do things, and that was the tools that were available. But like, I'm like, but also don't hide that fact. Like, you have now done a powerful thing with thousands of assets that you ripped off the internet to sort of redesign or rethink about this thing. But it's actually quite efficient and part of your process. And I'm even learning to, like, she's like, oh yeah. I'm like, well, what did you use? She's like, oh, I use this tool. And I was like, great. Like, I don't know that one, but show it to me. Like, I want to be able to sort of highlight these things as like, there's lots of ways to skin the cat, as they say, and the world of sort of continuing to show people how to do things and make stuff and think about systems sort of generally, it is always shifting. But if you can make that sort of efficient for students as well, they can go make really, really rad stuff. And that's sort of what I'm always trying to help people do, which is good.
I just recently I read, I don't remember who said, but somebody said something like, stop wasting resource power to ask, say please and thank you to AI, the generative AI, because it doesn't need that. And I was thinking, what is the point making conversational interface if you are not including the basic human conversational like practices like thank
Yeah.
you and please?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm a huge so the theory around it and the operations is really sort of operationally huge, but like we invent our tools and then our tools change us. But I'm sort of hacking that quote from a media theorist, McLuhan. But I have a 5-year-old. We're showing him how to do stuff. He asked YouTube to put things on the TV, and we're sort of like we're constantly sort of like reinforcing the same sort of social norms and behaviors because it is important. It is human centered, like that, and that without sort of infusing that into the design space is sort of there. And what I sort of lament a little bit about the world that we operate in is that things are moving so fast that the actual core of making things human centered is just being sort of usurped or undermined by speed. And I've sort of written about this idea of like everything's sort of moving at the triangle of speed, but not at the quality level. And it's then sort of back on designers or back on the people who sort of spend time in this stuff to say, well, what makes it good? Is it good that it just does that? But everything has a sort of action and reaction, and we as designers really need to pay attention to that, these things that do that. I am a huge advocate for a artificial intelligence, not at the polish design sort of nuanced space, but at the ideation sort of thinking about the problem, or organizing it and structuring it in a meaningful way and telling better stories versus like, oh, now I just don't have to like my client can handle all the words. Like, what? No, like the words are the thing that you as the writer like bring or whatever that is. Does that make sense? So that's my
yeah. Does it include also what you said about the experimentation, that we have the best tools ever to do experimentation?
Yeah, and the speed at which you can experiment, that means that you should experiment more. Right? And I find there's a lot that say like, oh, well, because we can do it faster, we're just going to ignore or not do the experimentation. And you're like, no, like this is now you have more time to do 5 more versions or sort of go test it with your audience faster, go validate those things with speed and pace, because that's the learning cycle that we need. That especially students that I spend a lot of time with them saying like, you don't know, you're not supposed to know. What makes you think you would know? And I even work with students like, this is really hard. And I'm like, what made you think it was going to be easy? Like, yes, AI makes it somewhat easy, but it's still like, but your outcome is not what you want, right? And they're like, no. And I'm like, so now what are you going to do? Are you going to continue to use that, or are you going to use your own skill to modify it? Like, there's lots of strategy there that goes into it, but the feedback loop is the important piece of it, and that's what I sort of continue to sort of highlight and say like, yeah, we're all practicing these things and they're not all going to win, right? They're all going to change rationally, but you find them sort of useful and meaningful in your process, that's a good opportunity.
Yeah, I think about like when the calculator was first invented, it's like probably accountants and, people who are number crunching were nervous. Is that taking away our job? Like, no, it's another tool to make the job more efficient, to make the job I don't know if it's easier. It's more efficient, really, right? And it's the same thing for us with these new tools. People are worried it's going to take away all of our jobs. And it's like, no, but certainly can make it much more efficient. Like your student who was able to take away those backgrounds or for
Mm-hmm.
research, analyzing open ends, thousands of survey open ends. Now we can analyze super quickly instead of taking days and
Days,
two
yeah.
people to code everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting time to really be testing all of these and seeing which ones can actually make our job more efficient, which ones are accurate. Because I find too, I have students use AI to to test basically their surveys to see if
Mm-hmm.
they improve their surveys, and sometimes it changes the meaning of the survey question. So like you still need that human component to see, is it actually helping me make the question
Yeah,
better? If it's a grammar issue, sure, it can make it better, but sometimes it's going to actually change the meaning, and you still need to check it to make sure it's helping you and not changing the project completely.
true. And there's this sort of interesting feedback loop there, even of like how much noise is created. Like, is it creating more? Is it the signal noise problem that we have sort of generally as designers? That's part of the value we bring, right? It's like there's all this noise, and we know how to bubble up stuff to the top to understand the signal, right? And
Yeah.
the signal is the hard thing to translate value as a whole. Now, using these tools to do that, it still creates all of this sort of like the AI does not think, it doesn't know, it just makes connections, but those connections are sort of programmed or designed into it. And you as a designer need to sort of translate that or understand where that point of view is coming from. And I see this sort of usurping storyboards and usurping personas that are just like, that is not a real, that is an
Mm,
AI generated human being that you think
mm,
is natural, but it's actually, we all know that it's not real. So
mm,
Yeah.
why are you using it, right? So if it's
mm,
sort of undone the sort of human-centered piece of that,
mm,
then how do you sort of do that? But
yeah,
it's being used because it's fast, right?
mm,
Because it can produce it at speed and pace. So
yeah,
then and again, that's a sort of a nuanced relationship to those things, but I find them sort of fascinating as an open discussion, but
mm,
also as a, well, what is its value? Is it about
mm,
efficiency?
mm,
Efficiency for the means of its ends,
mm,
not great. It will remove human beings from the from the,
mm,
and we hear people talk about that.
mm,
It's just sort of quote
mm,
from Bill Gates. It was like
mm,
80% of jobs can be done by computers, and I'm like, oh my god, that's the worst thing you've ever heard. Like that means he sees humans as the problem inside
mhm,
of work relationships,
mm,
and that's not. Uh, Generally, that is should be problematic, but also the world that
mm,
designers do, like there's lots of places who
mm,
see us as the problem, see us as being
mm,
too expensive, see us as being
mm,
replaceable by a
mm,
machine.
mm,
And I'm sort of advocating like, well, you may not be replaced by a designer isn't replaceable by an AI, but an AI, a designer with the use of AI is going to replace you. So you better learn how to use these things because it'll make you
mm,
the
yeah,
one that won't be usurpable or be undermined
yeah,
by the
yeah.
things that are there.
Yeah, I
But
think kind of what you talked about the like human control and quality control that Jen also mentioned that in surveys, kind of creating like trusting too much on the tool can be problematic because I've noticed as well that uh, the the AI is hallucinating, and it's kind of
mm-hmm.
fascinating to try to understand how did it come up with this idea that does not reflect the true the reality or the data that I was inputting the system. Why
Yeah,
this hallucination?
I don't know. All of that stuff I find so fascinating, mostly as a role of how one that it can sometimes produce like unexpected results, and it's sort of at the spark level of like, well, that's sort of what creativity sort of feels like sometimes. Like, do you try to track back how you came to a sort of solution or an idea? Like it would be next to impossible because that's how our brain works, right? It's like it can pull together millions of data points at once, which is even faster than what a computer can do. But I think there's that opportunity there to say like, that's the moment at which you're sort of feeding back on like, it's on the end user. It's on the designer who asked it a question or who put it into like, you need to change or iterate that. And from students' perspective, especially, like, well, why didn't you get the results you wanted? And you're like, well, show me your prompt. Like, oh, it's because your prompt is too general. And like, it's a, give me a woman. And you're like, what? Like, now it's pulling every idea of what that equals. Like, it'd be more descriptive or understand the sort of relationship of what those things equal. And that stuff is the most sort of fascinating piece of that to some extent. And from as an educator's point of view, like, I like them because they have a low barrier to entry, but have a high execution opportunity. And so there's this moment at which to say, like, look at how much faster you can produce an idea. But now we can have a discussion way earlier than if you had to hand draw that thing or you had to do that. And I advocate for generative AI or AI tools in general that utilize multiple systems, i.e. like, you can sketch and you can prompt and you can then sort of execute on the end point of that, which is the things that designers are generally bringing as value chains or value propositions generally. So that's sort of an opportunity there as well.
That's kind of interesting. Like, there's some research showing that doing things by hand, like a normal pen or whatever, like writing in hand and drawing in hand, actually has a huge impact on how our brain is developing. Do you see that there's a kind of risk in the future? Like, your students most likely were drawing with a pen when they were children and teenagers. What about the next generation? What if they
don't draw?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I as a designer, as a dad, like, I started actively sort of communicating this. The pen is the fastest tool which we have, and I'm always like advocating that, like students are like, I'm jumping right into Figma, and I'm like, no, stop. Like, Figma will not solve your problem, and it's really complex. Actually, it's like an incredible. You have to be pretty good at it to be fast at it, and so therefore you have to do the thinking before you sit down to execute the thinking. And tools like even AI, they're execution tools. They are not. They're like, sometimes are getting closer, and we may have a near future where, like, you could draw and the AI could render at the speed at which you could think. That's not happening now, but the role at which to say that can actually translate, then that puts more power back on your drawing ability or your ability to sort of render and visualize the world quickly. And with students and outputs, like, I've sort of advocated for, like, that is what you bring. Like, I carry a notebook around with me wherever I go. I draw a lot because that was what I was trained to do, but I actually find it sort of quickly translating into, well, I can execute ideas that I know are possible because I understand the systems and I can visualize them. Like, I'm soundly a UX designer, mostly because I know other people can do the sort of nuanced UI bits better than me, but they can't. But, like, I want to be in those sort of larger strategy relationship with that sort of pieces that why are you solving the problem you're solving? And that is really starts on pieces of paper. Like, I love working with high-end development teams and really quick teams that, like, a whiteboard sketch turns into an app solution in really no time at all. If you're, especially with the use of design systems and these things, like, there's lots of steps you can skip, but you can't skip the thinking. You could put it all together, but you still need someone to say, well, why is that solving the problem the way it's supposed to be solved, right? Like, and it's not infinite, but we definitely have an opportunity to sort of reinforce that value change.
Awesome.
We encourage those schools, those skills, and outputs, and that's sort of where even the course of what I'm teaching at UXPA is sort of aligned with that concept as well.
Okay. What advice would you have for someone who is exploring UX career, whether they are coming from the college or university or switching careers from other domain?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, mine is always, it sort of aligns this. It is a mindset and it's a practice mindset. Like, you're not there at which to say, I'm gonna, like, if you're going in it for the money, like, it's not. Yes, there may be some at some level, but the role of it is really that you have to translate into a systems mindset. Like, you are no longer going to be able to sort of just like execute in one way. Like, you have to step back and say, well, why are these systems changing the way that they are? AI has been in the pipeline for 30 years. right? Like if you trace it back, even I've written about this idea, but like it's only because we've gotten to a level where our technical advancement and our way at which processing works and the speed at which we can produce sort of data is mapping to an ability to make an LLM, right? But the role of sort of utilizing that effectively inside systems is going to usurp an entire paradigm of interaction design and product design and like all the things, all the stuff that we have sort of relied on in our world from a technology perspective is potentially up for grabs, which is makes it sort of like, well, go choose your specialty or your poison, but also like know that if you don't know how it came to be, you're not going to be able to think about it in any near future or any of that outputs. So spend some time sort of playing with the things, understanding why they have value, and then where they could go. And that starts at building prototypes, making stuff that people know how to use, and following best practices and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot, like, and that's my whole thing of like, nobody's going to know all this stuff. It's impossible. It's like, yeah, you could be somewhat, I sort of giggle at like, oh, I'm an interface expert. I'm like, what interface? Like,
Right.
in cars, in apps, and like it's so nuanced and so specialized at some level. That's an opportunity even there to say like it's not and so I think what we're even seeing is somewhat of the collapse of the generalist that can go across everything, because that's so hard to move from thing to thing. But if you're a good designer and you can step into any space, there is value that you can create. It's like sort of align that to like, I could go work at Botox or at whatever, John Deere. It's all this, like at some level, there's similar problems and human beings are still interacting with a lot of these systems that can be changed or modified by whoever designs it.
So awesome.
What do you recommend? Sorry, and just a quick follow-up. What do you recommend folks do to differentiate themselves from others? So it sounds like move away from generalist, find your niche, have the skills to be able to design, regardless of product and company. But really, what can people do to differentiate themselves from others? There's a lot of people on the job market.
Yeah.
Out from others.
I mean, we're all struggling with that. Some of it is a signal that you can do. I always say like good, interesting ideas, follow good, interesting other ideas. So like, don't just like follow trends and do that, but it's like, there's nuance that you care about and that are sort of aligned with your back. Like I see a lot of skill changing people and they're like, I'm just going to get rid of the fact that I was a cognitive scientist for 12 years and now got into this. And I'm like, what? No, like that cognitive scientist background is like exactly what you should be highlighting as why you are a unique UX designer versus like, I've just learned these new skills and now I know how to use Figma and therefore you should hire me. Like Figma is great. I don't want to like undermine them, but there is a relationship of like tools do not make the UX designer. The thinking and the ideas sort of translate into that. And yes, you will need to use those tools to be effective in your jobs, but learn them so they get out of your way. Show people how the tool is not what makes you, but that you can sort of translate that. That's where the thinking piece. Stop showing just the end point. Show the thinking. And I could stand on a pedestal and sort of complain about this stuff a lot, and I even have to follow some of that own stuff on my own work. And we all hate making our own portfolios and trying to carve out a little unique space that's our own that people recognize. But that's just what we have to do,
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about UXPA International. Our annual conference is in June 16 to 19, and you are teaching a course on June 16 on Collaborative UX and Generative AI, leveraging generative AI to enhance your conceptual abilities as well as improve collaboration in UX design. So tell about this course. Yes. How did you come up with this topic?
So this is an extension of the work that I've been doing both with my classes. I've also taught, given a couple lectures, mostly in using generative AI for UX deliverables, things like UX scenarios, personas, storyboards, using sort of these tools at which to speed up sort of the ideation space of like, how have you defined a problem? How can you visualize that problem meaningfully so that you sort of can attach it to a real world scenario and then sort of align other decisions that sort of go into prototyping or making as a whole. Mostly as a way to say, like, here's the tools that are available to you, and here's how you can do things that are quite quick. So in short sort of examples, in 20 minutes, you can sort of render a UX scenario and then produce an outcome with tools like Visual Electric, which is one of the AI tools that we'll be using in the course. Similarly, there's tools like ChatGPT where you could take a scenario, you've written it, you can pump it into ChatGPT and say, hey, refine this for me, or add this outputs, and it does a sort of a round of revisions. And there's an opportunity which is say the process of thinking about something can sort of go out to an AI tool, come back to the end user, the creator, the maker of that thing, and then be assessed or shared or collaborated on together. So like 5 people could come up with scenarios, they could combine them into AI, they can then vote on them as a team and then generate them in a relatively short amount of time. And so that sort of concept will be sort of highlighted or practiced in the course that I'll be teaching at UXPA, which should be quite fun and let some experimentation with these tools, but also sort of talk about generally the value of why designers collaborate with their system, like they are systems people, and they should connect out to the humans that they work with, their engineers, their product people, their CEO who gets to play with that, whatever, right? There's this opportunity to be porous in the way in which they create and make.
And is this for designers only, or are there other kind of roles that would benefit from?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Some of the deliverables will be sort of UX in the UX realm, like focused on things that UX designers sort of know how to do, whether that's prototyping or making sort of outputs. But generally, it's sort of at the level of process and early in the ideation session. So project managers, VP of product, technology people, like it doesn't have to be within the, like, I don't know how many developers show up to UXPA necessarily, but there's that opportunity to say, like, here is where it's at that fissure moment, like as you move between phases in your design process, where design tools like this can be quite meaningful, right? Like I have my end user, I've defined some needs they have. Well, how do I understand if those needs are real? Well, here's a way that we should sort of translate that, right? Like communicating that along the path or building that into your to your user flows or your cycles is really quite meaningful. And AI tools can be really beneficial in that space of even writing a better PRD or writing better user stories or whatever those things are. Like we're going to start finding these tools really speed up the process and don't require so much daisy chaining, which is sort of right now we have to daisy chain, but that's sort of also seen as where designers in their organizations can use or apply these tools back to their own teams and back to their own systems.
Awesome. And what do you look forward in the conference?
It's been I went in Austin a few years ago. Honestly, we're still sort of in the COVID hangover outputs. I'm just excited to get together with all my fellow nerds. Never been to Amsterdam. It was sort of a catalyst to do that. My wife is Greek. My family and I are going to go on vacation to Greece after. So we sort of had this, like, it was a catalyst to do this, but also just like to see Europe, but also see like, hey, we're all grappling with very similar problems, and just making more connections and doing that is sort of an opportunity as well, which would be exciting. And I'm excited to sort of to be involved and just get this thing going as a whole.
Awesome. And where can people find you? In a conference, of course, but if they want to reach out to you before that, after that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on Medium. I write regularly with UX Collective. I have a website at chrisrbecker.com. I have a couple books on Amazon. I just recently published this book, Effective UX Design Strategies, and that launched like last week or a
Nice,
week
congrats.
ago.
Yeah,
Which is great.
awesome.
It's exciting. It's like 14-month projects. Some of the things are in there. It has some concepts or whatever. Mostly for newer UX designers, sort of grappling with learning and building on their skills. So excited to sort of share that. And then as I said, I teach at the Art Center College of Design at Otis. And I'm happy to sort of share my credentials with those spaces as well.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Thank you for chatting with us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really excited to sort of share this stuff. And I'm really glad we could, we'll get together when we're out there. We can sort of meet in real person.
Awesome. See you soon in Amsterdam, Chris. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.